Okay. All righty. We will now call to order the Village Council work session of April 28th, 2026. We will begin with topic of general business, of which we have a handful of items, a little more than a handful. Some of these are items that we've discussed in the past. Some of them are sort of new items. And so let's go down the order we have in front of us. The first item is a discussion of permit compliance and unpermitted work enforcement practices. And I know this has been something that various members of the council have discussed from time to time. And we are fortunate to have one member of the council who's quite aware of this topic, and that's Jeremy, Councilman Hooper. And he's provided a handout for us. And Doug, do you have anything you want to begin with about this, or then we turn it over to Jeremy?
Yeah, maybe at just a very high level. So I think that I've heard this from multiple members of the council that sometimes there's frustration that you're sitting in a BOA meeting and someone is up before them and what you think is like, hey, they're asking for a variance of something is like, oh, why are we doing this? They did something wrong and we issue the variance. So I think that was one issue that maybe we can cover tonight and how to address that. And I think there's a couple others. A lot of people, particularly do-it-yourselfers, probably don't know when they don't need a permit. So I think educating people on that could be helpful. And then something that Jeremy's brought up is the making sure that we're covering our administrative costs with this so that we're recouping our costs when we have to go send someone out there again to check on something that maybe they didn't start with the permit. So
Okay.
I think those are all three issues that we can probably get to a resolution tonight on.
All right.
But Jeremy and Barb, that was just very quick level. So I'll just let you guys fill in as well.
Jeremy and Barb, go right ahead, and I'm sure your colleagues will have some questions for you, so go ahead.
Sure,
And
Mr. Mayor.
thank you for the handout, because I'm always curious about what goes on elsewhere, and you've sorted it out for us, so thanks.
Yeah. I'll give a little history on this as well as a little bit of the reason for bringing this to a council discussion tonight. And ultimately I think the value here is the discussion from council and the thoughts, and as well as Doug and team's thoughts in this as well, because I think that we have some good options before us. As mentioned, some of the concern that's been expressed, from council members, from board members of the BOA and Planning and Zoning Board, as well as the HPC, as well as citizens, is work being done without permits and seemingly the enforcement of it. So hearing those concerns actually for multiple years, one of the things that we've done here recently is really dig into what are we doing, what's prudent to do, what can we do from a general statute standpoint, and are there avenues or ways to make this more effective? And whether it's getting the word out of when you need a permit, making sure that we just mention that we need to tighten it up. So what's our opportunities? And so Barb and I have dug in. One of the things that we came to a conclusion is what are we doing today? And we wanted to know. Today, if work begins from a contractor or homeowner that is deserving of a permit, and it is found by staff, they are being charged double permit fee. In my handout to you, it's actually a shorter version of my longer handout from a couple months ago, from just a couple pages that I wanted to highlight. A couple months ago, we got into the reason, maybe a little bit of the problem. We talked about some of the conclusion. So here, one of the pages that I'll point out is we measured what other municipalities were doing and what we found. And pretty common practice throughout the state is really doubling the permit fee. There's a lot of municipalities doubling the permit fee. So it's good to hear that we do that consistently.
Remind me of our fees right now.
Yeah. So we have a fee schedule.
Okay.
So it varies by trade, and so it could vary from 50 to 150.
Okay.
Happy to share this with you. I just happen to have just one copy. I didn't make
No
a copy
problem.
for everybody tonight.
I might be able to pull it up.
You want to pull it up?
Oh, great. Well, go ahead.
All right. So we're doubling the permit fee. We had a great discussion with staff, worked through what our options were. One of the things that they pointed out that it is already listed at the bottom of the list of fees, that we're going to double the fee if you begin your work without. What we found in other municipalities is really the use of an administrative fee in lieu of many times doubling the fee. So that administrative fee then can be a separate amount that is determined by the council and the staff team to, instead of doubling, it could be $100, $200, up to $500 seems to be the statutory limit that we're allowed to do. That was the most common two ways of handling it. So some of the potential actions that Barb and I have come to that seem to be very, very sensible, in my eyes, there's four things that we can discuss. Number one is obviously do nothing, that we're continuing with. I think that we do, considering we do duplicate, double the fee, that's an option. We can add an administrative fee instead of doubling the permit fee. We can discuss further action, which is some of the things I've laid out here. Civil penalties for repeat offenders. There's a great model by Raleigh where we talk about the first violation. So the first violation could then be an administrative fee or double the permit fee. Second violation, which we don't have any second violation steps here, so this is a great thing to discuss, is a second violation within the first 12 months would be $100 per trade.
100 per what?
Trade.
Electrical, plumbing.
Okay.
HVAC, because each of those companies have to put their license number on the permit. So the larger not pulling the permit for the work, the higher then the civil penalty would be. And then the third violation within 12 months then would be $500 per trade, which would be our maximum that we could levy. In our discussion with our staff team last Friday, one of the things that were brought up is really possibly the frustrating point when we discuss reinspection fees, because that seems to be a growing issue that we heard as well. So I think that's a discussion that we talk as well.
Yeah, so just to clarify what that is, so contractors will schedule an inspection and say, it's going to be 10 a.m. on Friday. We get there at 10 a.m. on Friday, and they're like, oh, we're not quite ready for you, and say, come back at 4 p.m., we'll be ready then. So we actually added that into this schedule. So I think we might be okay at this point, because I think we increased it to $150, and maybe that can cover it. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind too as we look at this.
Okay. I also mentioned here updating Chapter 4.5.2 of our PDO. Doug reassures me that we can keep this inside of our municipal code and stay compliant from a general statute standpoint, and I think we have that discussion. But if we feel that we need to have this labeled inside of our PDO, I think that's something that we discuss. And something that Barb really drove for us was really community education and awareness. So Barb, do you want to speak to this? And one of the things that I left off here is really an NAC presentation.
Yes, there's so much, a lot of work being done by people who are do-it-yourselfers. And for example, one of my neighbors completely gutted the interior of his home, redid everything, electrical, everything, himself. And trying to find information on what permits are required and when they are required takes some effort. So one of the things I looked at was, what are we handing out to people in our new neighbor brochures that gives them sort of a sense for how much activity really does require a permit. When I started looking at this, and I found something on our website that it was like a 5-page document on all the things that needed permits, I was stunned. And I know that most of our residents coming in here have no clue. So one of the things we have to do is make it more evident in our new neighbor packages and also make this information readily available on the website. And you could dig around and find it, but I came up with a document that Jeremy had never even seen. So, I mean, it's really hidden in there, and it's wonderful. There's all kinds of information there. We just need to make it easier to find.
Can you point to that, Barb? Or send me the link to that?
Barb, are you specifically referring to that work done without a permit guide? Or?
Yeah, it's 5 pages.
Yeah. And actually, since this discussion started, we looked at that again, so we have some minor updates to it as well, so. But yeah, I think NACE is always a good source for communicating.
Yes.
The new resident brochure, periodically in the newsletters as they go out, and certainly on our website are all areas that we can focus on to get the word out. And I'll admit, it is a little tough because, you know, my neighbor is replacing his deck or not. Well, anyway, he's like, do I need a permit? I was like, well, it depends. Like, are you tearing the whole thing down or are you just replacing the planks? And it's like, okay, if you're replacing planks, then no. But if you're taking the whole thing out, then yes. So it is a little difficult to get to that level of granular, whatever, specificity without
I do
on the
think,
website.
I do think the publicizing of these things on those platforms, and particularly the website, will always make it easier for people to forward information to their neighbor or to someone who asks them something, rather than just say, check with the village. Because I find when I can send a link from our website, the discussion pretty much ends, okay, unless somebody doesn't understand what the link says. But usually, I don't hear back from them on a topic, whether it's bicycle and pedestrian issues or a variety of things. But I would suspect that these in particular, because I hadn't factored in the do-it-yourself community, which we probably have some of those folks in Pinehurst that are often doing that. And that's a legitimate question. You had it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, especially with YouTube these days, you can learn how to do anything.
I could even do wiring, just kidding.
You know, I think that leads it into, so what are we trying to achieve? You know, we obviously want to uphold the integrity of our PDO. We don't want to reward someone for jumping the process, because as they jump the process, many times they're jumping the opportunity for, whether it's our staff team, you know, or our planning team, whether it's our boards, to review and approve for appropriateness. And I think the HPC sees that a lot. You know, we had it last Thursday. A builder went ahead and did the work, was fairly aware he went ahead and did the work, in my opinion, and then basically was, okay, punish me. Okay, I've already done the work. And it puts our boards in a really bad position, because the really only opportunity is to try to put their own mindset of, would I approve this before it was done or would I not? And then if I would not have, then they have to face the people and say, tear it down. And that's a very, very hard thing to do.
Well, let me jump in there, Jeremy. At the end of the 4-page document, where you had note, historically, the addition or modification of windows and doors, that you had that up, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, does this apply specifically? I saw minor work, major work, and I think HPC. Was this note intended to be restricted to the HPC, or was this designed to cover village-wide?
Yeah, so that memo was for me, and yeah, it was intended for HPC.
Okay, so let's go back just to the segment above it, reinforcing Board of Adjustment and HPC standards. Now, toward the end of my chairmanship, a home was approved, lovely home built. Builder comes back after it's all done with 35 things that should have been, it was actually 41, but there were some duplicates. So it was 35 things that he had done that were not what the original COA was for. And you're right. HPC could have said, screw it, take all those things out, and then come back to us and ask. And that's not reasonable, but is there a way to impose fees that make it equally punitive? You can go ahead and do that if you want to, but when you come back, right, there's going to be a cost imposed. And secondarily, I don't even know, do we have, within the application, what I will call an amendment fee. You know, it's, if I recall, it's $500 when you have to file for a COA for major work.
Yeah.
So I start down the road, and maybe I'm doing everything right, and my owner says they want to change something. Rather than forcing people to go back through an entire new application, is there a way to make that piece of compliance easier and to encourage people to do it, simultaneous with making the penalty for not doing it more punitive?
Right. So a couple of things there. I think, yes, you can make it easier, but you'd just be making those minor adjustments instead of major ones. So that would mean staff could handle on their level. So we can look at that and see, are there some items that should be considered major or minor? And I think windows was one that maybe we want to consider. There's a $500 fee for a variance, and there's a $1,000 fee for an appeal for the Board of Adjustments. So I don't know if, I am doubtful that we can just, charge $5,000 if you do something crazy and something like that. I'll go ask council if there's a way to handle that or a different way.
I mean, that $200 per violation, the guy who had 35 of them,
Yeah.
it gets stacked up. The guy
Well-
who has 3 of them, okay, our goal is not to raise revenue here, and our goal is not to be punitive. I think the ultimate goal of all of these is safety.
Yeah.
Right? We want the wiring done properly so the house doesn't burn down.
And I think another part of that goal is to make it more in the interest of the applicant to be in compliance. We're in essence providing some compliance assistance. We're saying, hey, here's what happens if you don't follow this, so here's how you follow it.
And by the way, Barb, the neighbor of yours who completely renovated his, if you have the capability to do that, I strongly suspect you know there are normally permits
Yeah,
involved.
agreed.
Nobody just miraculously knows how to rewire their house.
Right.
One of the things, John, just to follow up on some of the points you made, Alex and I have been talking about how can we address some of those issues. And one of the things that he suggested was we could have staff go out when it's at the rough staging area of the home. So like, all the holes in the building have been framed in. That might be a good opportunity for staff to go out there and say, look, your plans don't show a window there. So this is a good time to stop you and say you need to come back either with a minor adjustment and go through staff, or a major one and go through the permitting process again.
I mean, it was never clear to me, probably because I never asked, is what was the linkage between what the planning department and HPC approved and what the building inspector goes out and looks at?
Yeah.
When he's doing the rough inspection?
Right, 'cause
Does he have the plans in front of him?
He's not looking at anything that the HPC approved. He's only looking at the public or the building code safety items. So if we could potentially have a staff member, a zoning staff member, go out and look for those things.
To stitch those more closely together, yes.
I'll mention as well as it would be another stop for staff. Certainly more cost involved on that. So when we think about communicating this to our public, adding another meeting in, all of that adds and drives up the cost to our community. So I just want to keep that in our thoughts. But the urgency of this really is not a high level. It's fairly low. So we don't have to do anything today. I think the value is our conversation of where we want to go. And I would like, if the feedback is strong enough for us to move forward, what are the topics that we want to move forward on? What would the framework look like? Some of the things you mentioned, and then Barb and I would continue our work. Is that fair? I mean, that's what I think.
And actually, if you don't mind, at this point, I would say, you have here a model after Raleigh, which is the first violation at administrative fee only. I'm okay if we keep that as the double permit fee, or if we make it a flat dollar amount. I don't know, $100, $250, whatever. I'm fine either way. And then we can keep the second and third violations.
Is there a fine for interrupting a work session?
There is. It's actually,
Was the list on here?
it's
I found it.
pizza for all staff
Yes,
members.
yes, it says pizza.
That's in the criminal code.
The, one thing we mentioned that I want to get in the loop again is this repeat offender. One, do we have many? I can't believe we do, but if we do, what's the deterrent we can build in there?
Yeah, so, from the information that planning gave me, we had one in the past year, and they brought it into compliance.
Okay.
So,
All right.
I don't think
It's
it's a big problem, but I also don't think $250 or whatever fee we decide is necessarily gonna stop someone either, but at least we're trying.
We're trying, that's fine, as long as we're trying. Okay.
And Jeremy, the only urgency is, given that there just aren't that many more new lots on which to build, we're more likely to see this in renovations than we are in new construction. That's a guess on my part, but that's the only sense of urgency whatsoever.
Yes.
But doing it right is more important than doing it quickly.
Yes.
Okay, so what's our next step then?
Yeah.
I think,
Jeremy and Barb, you've probably thought about this a little more. For the first step, do you want to have the double fee, or do you want to pick a dollar amount?
I was going to say, that's my first question, is are we happy with our framework today relative to doubling the fee? And I will point out that Alex had a very great point. There are differing fee amounts. The only difficulty is if we're talking about a $30 fee or a $50 fee, we may not be recovering the cost of the village if we just double it to 100 or 60. But there are fees on here that are $100, $200. So are we comfortable with that structure that's happening today? Or do we want to establish an administrative fee? I think that's our first question.
I'm going to defer to Barb and you on that.
I guess my first question, and I think we answered this in the meeting the other day, is do we think we are recovering our administrative costs now with this
Yeah,
structure?
and my recollection of Alex's response is, yeah, I think we're doing okay, yeah.
It's difficult, and I think when you think we want to pair all of our team very, very well, and their time is very, very important, I think a lot of the cost is taking it away from something else as well. And that's important to also factor in when we talk about doubling a fee. I don't know if that it would become a little bit more punitive if we say $100 on top of their permit fee or something to that nature. But I think that's part of the discussion that was important to have, and then the overall framework that we're pointing out here in our potential actions.
And our goal is to recoup actual expenses at least, as well as providing some modest deterrent.
Sure.
So it might be, double the fee with a minimum of $100 or something to take into account the smaller ones.
Yeah, I think that,
That's
Good
reasonable.
idea.
Jeremy, I just sent you an email request for a contribution to the number 6 Community Association newsletter, because I think a little primer on this in all of our neighborhood newsletters would go a long way.
I agree. Perfect.
yeah. So,
Happy to.
John's suggestion's a good one. We'll go back, put that in. Jeremy, if we look at a second violation, third violation as more punitive if they make more mistakes, I think that's fairly reasonable. We can do that.
Well, I think that's good framework, and that was my other point, is what we're proposing here is very, very, very reasonable, really, in what we're asking staff to do, and maybe those steps. And if we're able to put some framework together that's a little bit more, a little stronger, I think the real kicker is something that's a little more automatic. It's automatically going to happen if someone does this, not if we think it was not that hurtful or was hurtful. I think that we got to have a little bit more of an automatic fee involved.
Yeah,
I don't think, if we're in this realm, I don't know that there should be an awful lot of discretion available. I'm not saying can't be none, but.
yeah, and I think I want to make sure we're not mixing two different things, because yes, if there was work done without a fee, work done without a permit, I think, yes, it's an automatic, you get the fine, whether it's double up to 100, whatever. So I think that's good. What I think we need, areas that we can focus on educating staff and board members on, that you don't have to approve every variance that comes before you. I think that can go a long way. Also, when we interview people on those boards, we can maybe make that a little bit more of a point of education or feel them out. It's like, hey, if someone came before you with this, and obviously they knew and they did it, and they're just asking for forgiveness, what do you do?
And when an individual comes before the council for a position here, it's worthwhile, one of the council members just remind them of this topic so that they'll be on their minds as they step into that job.
Yeah.
I don't think they confront it that often, which is part of the reason I think that in the past, there was sort of a throw up your hands approach from some folks, like, I don't ever remember talking about this before, we'll let it go.
And people feel bad making someone tear down a carport.
Right.
But it's like, they should tear it down, like, they violated the rule. And Dan has offered a couple of times that he is willing to come and train our HPC and BOA, so they have the tools to deal with that more effectively.
I think we definitely have to take Dan up on that.
Yep.
Find one afternoon or something where he can
Give both of them.
cover both the P and Z and the HPC, and that's it.
Any more feedback from really the guidelines or the structure that maybe we're proposing or anything? John brought up a really good idea.
No, I think you're working in the right direction here.
Okay,
Hopefully
that's what
we've
we're looking
given
for
you a
today.
little
Are we
bit more
any different?
definition.
All right, so what I think we would just ask for, your approval on is maybe Barb and I to continue our quest, maybe get a little bit more specific. From what I'm hearing is something a little bit more automatic and less discretion that's going to happen if work is done without a permit. We'll continue to look for opportunities to support our BOA boards as well as P&Z and HPC in their efforts. So we may bring in a topic to what could happen with reviewing the, what do you call it, HPC, the appropriateness? Certificate of appropriateness.
COAs, yeah.
COAs. And then, again, it's not urgent. Let's come back at some future date and time, and let's have a little bit more specific proposal
Yeah,
to you.
let's do that. And I also think what we ought to do is when we take final action, we ought to formally send a note to the HPC members and the P&Z folks. Let them know the council has recently made these adjustments. It's just an FYI, so they'll know we're taking it seriously and we're bringing it to their attention.
And maybe include their feedback. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, next steps, Jeremy, I know you just went through them, but maybe very specifically, we can come back with fee schedule changes to address ongoing second, third violations. The whole education thing, we kind of already talked about, but that's something that's...
We'll have a list.
Yep, and something we've already kind of got the cart rolling on that. And then, yes, training our boards and committees. And the idea of a planning staff member going out to review COAs, I think that has the potential to solve a lot of them, at least on the HPC side.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think that's fair, and I think that's the direction I think that's healthy for our village. And I think you and I will all address. I don't foresee any PDO changes after our discussion on Friday, but if there's any conflicting, points or anything in the PDO, then we'll come back with any proposed PDO changes. I don't foresee any, but it's possible.
Yeah, we can see if if it's not covered in the municipal code, if it should be in the PDO and vice versa. Yeah, so we can check those.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Is that good? Okay.
Okay.
Doug-
Thank you very much, both of you guys.
Doug, just on one last point there. If I'm not in the historic district and I meet with planning and I get an approval for, I'm putting an addition on my house and I'm doing the work myself, or I'm a builder, and then I make changes in that, they're not covered by a COA, is it the same thing?
It's a good question, because, I don't think we have the staff capacity to go out to every building permit. And
But you're still going to send an inspector
Yeah,
out
the
to do a
inspectors
rough
go,
inspection.
yeah.
And does that inspector have a copy of the plan that was approved, if you will?
he has access to it. What that process looks like, what their inspection involves, I'm not entirely sure, but that's something we can
Yeah,
talk to them about.
I guess what I'm saying is that we ought to think about it holistically, not just in the historic district,
Yeah.
if that's possible, given staff constraints. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chairman, Barb in particular. We'll move on from that. Discussion, that takes care of A. B, short-term rentals in the PDO. Doug, I guess we have 2 items under, well, actually, we have 4 items
Four, we
underneath
got,
this. I'm going to suggest that the first item is intensification. I think we have some cleanup to do regarding some legal questions as to what we can and can't do in this area. And I'd rather get some further clarification on that before we engage in a discussion on it. And so if it means postponing that topic for a meeting, I'm okay. But if there's something we want to cover now about it, we can do that also.
Just on a high level, yes, I think there is some debate about, whether certain things are considered intensification at a short-term rental. And I talked to Dan this morning. He is willing to talk with us. We could do that in different ways. We could, if there's 2 members of the board that want to meet with me and him just to cover those items, or we could have him come to a work session in the future. Is there a preference by council?
Well, maybe the 2 who have been working on this the most can meet with you guys as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And then we can take it from there as to whether or not we need to go to the work session. Does that sound right, Barb? Okay.
Okay.
So, Jeremy, you've been in this too, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So why don't we have Barb and Jeremy and you and Dan? And
Yeah, we'll try to make Jeremy a call while he's in Austria. Yeah.
Why don't we meet in Austria?
Go. Yeah.
There we go.
We can do that. We can do that. Come on.
That's good thinking there, Rob. Okay, so that's going to be a meeting.
The next short-term rental item we have is process of non-conforming use certificates. So in the original ordinance that was adopted, it gave people a year to apply for what we have named a non-conforming use certificate. The questions come up is like, some people need a document from the village when they're like selling their house or refinancing, something like that, that they can use to definitively say, yes, I'm allowed or I'm not allowed to be using this as a short-term rental. And we've kind of talked about it in the past, but our recommendation is that we issue a letter of, a
Termination?
certificate of,
I thought it was a
what do
letter
they
of
call it?
determination.
Certification.
Certification, something
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Okay.
So that we're certifying that at this point in time, it's either a legally non-conforming use for the property, or we can also say it's not.
Okay.
And I think that makes sense. We can let people know that that's available. And what's great about that is it's for a point in time, because our ordinance is very specific. If you are not using it for a period of 365 days, you lose that legal non-conforming status.
Right. Let me speak to this for a bit. I've heard over the last few years from several STR owners who usually they're requesting, how do they get a non-conforming use certificate? And I go through it. There was a period, a year of time where you could apply, and for whatever reason, sometimes they are absentee owners. They live in Ohio or they live in Pennsylvania, and they never got around to it, or they weren't aware of it. Some actually live here, but they all want to comply, and there is an advantage to them to getting some sort of documentation. So I think that this letter of certification or determination that Doug's proposing makes a lot of sense. And it doesn't require us to open up the ordinance. And I really believe this process demonstrates a certain degree of responsibility on the part of STR owners who understand the ordinance and want to comply with it to the best of their ability. And I think they feel more comfortable if someone tells them, yes, you have a property that is a non-conforming use, eligible for non-conforming use certificate, but the period of time to get that is passed, so we're going to issue something that's similar in the form of a letter. So I want to the STR owners that have contacted me and others in the council in the past, one, thank you for your suggestions. We think we found a way to handle what is a reasonable request. And thanks also for your cooperation. There was no reason that you needed to sort of keep coming back to us and say, hey, what do I have to do? I really want to get this. But other than that, I think you wanted to be comply with our ordinance and demonstrate your support of the village's actions. So I'm very much in favor of that. I do think we need to put a little thought into how we roll this out, so we notify folks. There may be a letter to some people we need to send out. There obviously should be something that we put on our website at the right time. And from there, I think we can go forward, and we'll then have a record ourselves of who we've issued these to, and they will have the piece of paper they want. So that's my thinking.
Let me understand, if I missed the window, I was legitimately, I was on Airbnb, and I can document that. But I missed the window and I don't have an NCUC. I can come get this letter instead and this is not pursuant to a sale transaction or something. This is what I might want to have. Why is that of value to me instead of just continuing to operate because the NCUC was voluntary anyway?
Right. So short of a sale, it may not have much value. So, but some people need it to, document that it's an income-producing property or something like that. Or if we find that it has now has more than 15 nights stays, then we're sending them a nasty letter, and this would be a way for them to prove it and show that they're now coming to conformity.
John, I think lawyers would sometimes refer to this as a belt and suspenders approach to making sure that everybody's in conformance, and which is why I sort of like it.
Some HOAs also require like some sort of blessing from the village. I know some of the lawn and tennis club area, like they have to have approval from the HOA to run a short-term rental, and they ask if it's approved by the village.
I hadn't heard that. Good reason. Another good reason.
I'm a little more disposed to honor that request, but okay. I just want to understand, there's obviously a difference. What is the difference and what are we trying to do here?
Yeah. I will say the most often, so we get letters, we get requests for these letters of zoning certification for lots of different things, not just short-term rentals. Like it could be, can I start a gas station on this property or whatever it is, which pretty much you can't do that here. So, but yeah, but short-term rentals is one that we could write it for.
So separate and apart from short-term rentals, I might write to the village saying, I'd like to do X on my property, is it okay?
Yep.
And if you determine it's okay, this is what you issue to me.
Yep.
It's okay in your zoning for you to do whatever
Yes,
it is.
right.
Okay.
All righty.
So we're not inventing a new procedure here,
No,
we're just applying it to this case.
So we already have an application on our permit portal for a letter of zoning certification.
All right, well, I think what you got, Doug, is a green light, and just come up with a nice rollout so that our residents are aware, and we can direct them to the website, and it should eliminate the confusion. And to some of those people who have sent emails to me, I'll forward it to you what the final document looks like, and you can then comply accordingly. Okay.
Yeah, we'll make it very clear on the website that this is how you apply for one of those, and there is a $50 fee. So
That's fair. Okay. Now we've got two other items. The homestay, and these are somewhat related, homestays and accessory dwelling units. I know, Jeremy, you've spent some time on this topic. If you want to opine, and Doug, if you want to give us sort of a little overview of how these two interrelate and where we are on them as a village.
yep. So in the PDO, we do define what a homestay is, which is a little awkward because we don't have a specific use table for homestays. So anyway, staff as of now considers a homestay as a short-term rental use, and so we've been treating it that way. Council may want to go a different approach. But I think that this was also an area that, depending on how the intensification outcome, discussion comes out, depends on how we may want to handle homestays. But in general, a homestay is a lodging use where there is a full-time resident on the property. And typically, those are usually going to be less burdensome to the neighbors because you have someone on site that can manage that.
And it's often a family member, too. It's not unusual for it to be a family member that's in the homestay.
This, does it depend if I'm renting out a room by the night, or whether I'm writing a 90-day lease or a one-year lease to come stay in my spare bedroom?
So it would only be considered a short-term rental if it was for under 30 days.
Okay, that's what I thought.
A little background to this concern. So in 2022, when we were debating and going through the ordinance opportunity, we made the decision to remove the definition of homestays at that time. We did so because the thought was to bring it back at a later date and define it a little bit more specifically, kind of to your point. Is it a room? How many rooms would it be? What's the further definition? And to Doug's point, we would go through the use table and add it on a separate line to a normal STR. In the relation to the ADU concerns, so then as we think about homestays and expanding them, what are they? Are they singly just a room that someone is renting out? Are they 8 rooms in the home? Is it someone living in their ADU and renting out the large house? What is a homestay? And I believe that as long as council is happy with the way that, Doug has directed our village to look at a homestay as the same as an STR, I think that kind of solves some of those concerns specifically. Our other opportunity would be to define it further and get into specifics, as John mentioned, which we could do, but then we would need to dig into what is the relationship of a homestay to a ADU? How many rooms could someone rent out? Get into the further definition, if that is what I think council would want to do. Or we can say, hey, what we're doing is great. My question to Doug on Friday was, what is our legal authority to just continue what we're doing? Doug feels confident in that we're doing the right thing by, and you can speak further if you want to, but we're doing the right thing by just defining it as a normal short-term rental, and that clears up a lot of the further concern unless we want to dig into it.
Yeah.
I think, is that
Yeah,
fair?
I would say, yeah, right now we're treating it as a short-term rental. If council wants to change that direction, I think we can, because we'd probably be, maybe loosening the restrictions on those. Not that saying we are going to do that or we want to do that, but that's probably the only way we really could go. But I think we need to clarify this intensification issue first, because that, I think, will weigh in on how we're going to treat homestays in the future. So we'll cover that, and then homestays will depend on that.
And I think for me, this was not something that I had thought of beforehand. To me, there's a difference between me living in the house and renting out my ADU, and me living in the ADU and renting out my house. The potential, that is an issue of intensification that I would find not currently addressed, or at least I'd like to hear more opinion of council on that.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that before Jeremy raised it. But.
Yeah, and which kind of brings us to the very next item, which is ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And so as they pertain to short-term rentals only, they are allowed where short-term rentals are allowed and ADUs are allowed, which currently is only one parcel on the property, and that's the Carolina Hotel. So essentially, no ADU can be used as a short-term rental unless it had been operational before the ordinance went into effect.
Do we know how many ADUs we have in this village? Ballpark, is it under 100, over 100?
I don't know, because they're especially in the whole historic district, there's a lot of accessory dwelling units that have been there for 100 years. So I don't know.
You'd have, in the historic district, you'd have a lot of detached garages that have the potential to perhaps be renovated to include a residential unit. So even if they're not that way now, they
Right.
could be made
Yeah,
that way.
maybe they're only accessory buildings right now and not dwelling units,
Yeah.
but, yeah.
And presumably, we don't care about that because it's post
Right.
October 15th.
Yeah, so, yeah, to be clear, if we find that a short-term rental is being run in an ADU that was not in existence prior to 2022, we will send them a cease and desist notice of violation letter.
So, do we need to further explore the intensification issue before we can deal with the ADU, or are we okay with the ADU?
I think as far as the ADUs as they relate to short-term rentals, I think we are okay unless we mess with the homestay definition.
Which
Then
we're leaning against messing with it, but we want to,
That was
Be
the
sure.
point I was trying to make. If we're happy with homestays, it kind of solves the ADU problem
I got you.
in relation.
Okay. I'm fine with that. I think that's, again,
So, yeah, we'll have a conversation with Dan, and then depending on how that goes, one or two of these things might need to be brought up again.
okay. All righty. So we have had our discussion on the ADUs in the PDO, basically, right?
So I wanted to be clear, so there was the ADUs as they pertain to short-term rentals was a very specific thing, so I think that's taken care of. ADUs in general is a bigger question. And I will say that, so right now, they're allowed in, to make it simple, basically R210, so we need very large, 5 acres or greater,
ETJ.
and roughly the historic district. They're by right in those areas, and you can get a special use permit and, for other areas. So I put a little bit of information about what an ADU is, how it works in the memo. I will say, though, that as we move forward, if we are considering any adjustments to how we regulate an ADU, we need to be very careful because it is likely going to be considered a down zoning. And so we probably can't do it, so.
Right, okay. That's a good, no, that's a good,
Is-
worth point.
Is there an issue that we think requires being addressed related to ADUs other than with respect to its impact on short-term rentals?
So one thing that actually Jeremy brought up and former council member had brought up before is if it's a detached accessory dwelling unit, the setback is different than if it's part of the primary dwelling on the lot. And so they would only have to follow the accessory dwelling unit, or sorry, the accessory building setback, which is, depending on where it is, probably 10 feet.
That's 5.
Yeah.
Sometimes 10 feet. So I think there's two concerns that I've brought up, and we do have to be very, very considerate of 382. And I think Senate Bill 382. You know, number one issue is what Doug's bringing forward today. And if we calculate basically an ADU can be built for 30% size of the main home. If we have a 3,500 square foot ADU, that's over 1,000 square foot. We have many cottages in the village that start out as 1,000 square foot. We're not talking about a small garage. So if we allow the same setback in a dwelling unit as we do a shed, which is also a accessory unit, just not this missing
Yeah,
a dwelling
accessory building,
course,
yep, yeah.
accessory building, and we allow a dwelling unit to have the exact same setbacks. In essence, we could be encroaching and putting dwelling units of very large size, 1,000 plus in many cases, right next to someone's property line where we would not allow them to build a house that close to that property line. So that has floated up as an issue for a long period of time. So but I don't know what our options would be now.
Right. So
at
I very
382.
much agree that's a concern. I wouldn't want a 1,000 square foot dwelling unit 10 feet off my property line. Yeah, but that is something that we can propose to Dan. Is there anything we can do about it? We discussed that briefly this morning, and he was like, you probably can't because it's a down zoning. But we can see if there are any other options.
That would be worthwhile finding out more about, yeah.
Issue number two that I'm concerned about really is an old PDO definition versus a new PDO. I'm a little overly concerned about this one. So our definition of that 30% from, in the old PDO standpoint, was you could only calculate that on the heated square footage of the home. So if a home was 3,500 square feet, 500 square foot of that was the garage. In the old PDO, your ADU could only be 900 and basically a little over 900 feet. The new PDO leaves out the heated square footage term, the heated term. So now we have allowed, through the new PDO process, we are allowing larger ADUs to be built because now they can be calculated on the whole square footage of the home. Now, in our team's defense, it was very hard. When a permit came forward, that was something they had to notate. It wasn't the most difficult thing to notate, but we've approved a lot of ADUs in the past on the overall square footage. We were not enforcing that strongly. But the PDO stated heated square footage.
Say we, council, or we
The village.
planning and zoning?
We as in the village.
Okay.
Just in general when I say we.
Yeah.
But today, through the new PDO definition, in my opinion, we are allowing larger ADUs to be built from that definition change, which I'm concerned about.
Was the
But,
omission
what can we do?
of heated deliberate? Was this even
So-
discussed?
Following up on that, so the previous PDO had two definitions, or had different measurements for, one for accessory buildings and one for accessory dwelling units. So accessory buildings had the 30% of the square footage, and accessory dwelling units was 30% of the heated square footage.
Yeah.
So it got combined in
If I
the,
could build a bigger shed than I could a dwelling unit.
technically.
Then yes,
yeah.
if you want to make it all a shed. So that's my concern, and again, now we're in a position, I'm not so sure what we can really do other than acknowledge that that was something that happened.
But changing that in the PDO formally might be construed as taking away a right that I now have, and in that sense, a downzoning.
Could be.
So, well, one of the things we'll watch for is to see what corrections are made to the 382 downzoning issue, because they've talked about that, and then assess at that point. But as of now, it looks a little iffy.
Yeah, agreed. I think, this issue of like a 1,000 square foot dwelling unit, 10 feet off your property line is a very good reason that, we can go to the legislature and be like, look what you did. Like, we can never correct this now. Give us an opportunity to amend some things like that. And maybe it's as simple as we get a, home rule for just us to deal with just this issue. I mean, that could get messy, but.
Yeah, I
But
doubt
what effectively we're asking for is it can't be 10 feet, it's got to be 20 feet or whatever the normal setback is.
Right.
That's where it is, if it's actually being used for dwelling purposes.
I think
So we're kind of asking them to make it in conformance with what standard zoning and standard setbacks would be,
Right, so,
including on that particular lot itself. The lot might have a 20-foot setback, but somehow the ADU could be done at 10?
right. Yeah, because it's an accessory building, like a shed. Shed you
Versus
could build
dwelling.
10 feet off, yeah.
Yeah, and then again, we've said a few times, but now we have 1,000 plus, sometimes 1,200, sometimes 13, 14, 1,500 square foot accessory dwelling unit that's built on a 10 or 5 in some cases.
There's
foot
some
setback.
larger homes than that where it could become a 2,000 or 2,500 square foot dwelling unit.
Yeah, and I think it's important to clarify, I don't think we're anti-ADU, and I think it's important, but as these things become more popular, we just must understand the effects on our community from, that's all.
Yeah.
And where do we put them?
This is a very good discussion, because it clarified a few things about there is a distinction with a difference between whether you say dwelling or building.
Right, very much a shed or as someone actually living in that.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you're all aware that the state legislature is probably not all that excited about regulating ADUs. I mean, they see it as a possibility to solving some of the housing issues
Right.
across the state.
Yeah, I think the idea of a sort of a special bill would be, just for us, would be an unusual request in this area, but that's why I think we probably would, let's wait and see how they address it overall, and then we'll see where our possibilities lie once we know that. Is that, that works? Thank you for that education. All right. We can move on to the discussion of landscape buffers in the Pinehurst Development Ordinance. I think this is good news, so go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so just a little clarification to begin with. Talk about landscape buffers. What we're talking about here is specifically like what are the landscaping requirements for an infill lot and not for a larger development? Because in the PDO we had different types of landscape buffers depending on whether it was, you know, commercial to residential or things like that. But we're only going to talk about infill lots and how many trees you need to keep on that. So a few years ago, before I was here, there was concern that, you know, builder comes in, he just clear cuts the lot, and, you know, you're starting fresh, and there are no mature trees left on the property. So the tree buffer ordinance was created. It was
Was that in 2021, or was it?
big 2021.
Okay, thank you. Now I remember.
So it was a little difficult to administer because there was a lot of calculations, and depending on how much, and you would reduce for driveways and for utilities and all these things. So what the current PDO did was just simplify it. So based on what zoning the property is, so R5 to R8, those are very, very small properties. You're required to have 4 trees on that property, and so on and so forth, as you can see going down. So an R210, you'd have to remain 16 trees per dwelling that's put on the property. And so when staff came up with these numbers, because they were looking at, you know, what really are we requiring from all these other previous tree buffer ordinance applications or processes? What was the actual number of trees that were being required to stay on the property? And so we were trying to stay consistent with that. So the intent is to keep people to have mature trees on their property when they build a house, but sort of simplify the process and how people get to the number that is needed for the property.
So, in the historic district, there is also there's a restriction in certain cases, not all, which I think HPC should address, on when you want to remove a tree, on the impact on the overall canopy. And obviously, if someone wanted to clear cut a lot, there is no more canopy, and that could be prohibited under, you might not get your COA.
Right.
This is looking at this village-wide, not just the historic district.
Correct.
Does it also apply to vegetation other than just trees?
This is just trees, mature trees on a property.
So if there is boundary vegetation that is not a tree, I can take that out anyway, whether I take the trees out or not.
Yeah, so you'd have to keep the defined number of trees, but yes, the
But I can
scrub brush underneath. Yeah.
I can clear my lot right to the lot line on 4 sides, regardless of the degree to which that compromises privacy between me and my neighbors.
It's on your property, yeah.
But this specifically focuses just on trees.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to be clear, this is for like infill lot, single lot development.
Right.
For larger developments, there's buffer landscape requirements elsewhere in the PDO.
When we established the ordinance, there was also a lot of trade-offs and measurements on whether or not a certain diameter tree was preserved. Then you would get so much of a credit versus off the perimeter, if we all remember.
We did that last meeting.
Yeah, we did that last meeting, and I think that first when we look at it, a little bit of historical thought. When we began the discussion, if my memory serves me correctly, we really had an ordinance that was really serviceable, I felt, to our community. And then we went from 15 or 20 feet, we ended up at 25, and I think in some cases we ended up at 35, and then we all debated, really the diameter of the trees and what kind of calculation you got. And we netted an ordinance that was serviceable, that even if you did clear cut the lot, you were required to put back, it gave some framework of putting back the trees. And I think that whenever we simplify it to this point, my opinion is we've taken another step down below. And I think that, when we talk about just preserving 4 trees, 5 trees on an R8, in 8 trees on a 30,000 square foot lot plus, we really see where we've taken the ordinance. Now, it's serviceable, but it's really, I think, to the bottom is where we would want to go, in my opinion. I'm not, it would keep people, but, and then let me ask this question. So remodel, there was a point in the ordinance to where if someone was going to go through a remodel above a certain percentage, then they were also going to have to live up to, the buffer ordinance as well. Is that still in place? Is it anything
I would
that
have to
requires a
check on
permit?
that.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
I could probably read through section 14 real quick.
Well, I mean, I was reading through 14, but most of it's driven towards subdivisions as well. I don't think we get into section 8. Something had to do with landscape buffers for every permit situation. So again, I just think the discussion is very important. The realization that we now have a different process for when subdivisions come before us, that they're no longer having to put the trees in between the homes. Then in many cases, we may just have to save or plant 4 trees. It's just something for us, I think, our mindset and understanding that it's different. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just different.
My question is, what are we trying to accomplish here? The trees are not primarily for privacy.
Sure.
They're
Yeah,
for other aesthetic reasons.
Right.
but
I think we're trying to protect the tree canopy.
That's basically it.
And there are situations, and I didn't deal with this every day like some of the planning staff did, but they'll potentially group trees in one corner so it gets them all in one place anyway. So there were other issues.
Loophole there.
Yeah.
People do that, yeah.
So this certainly made it cleaner. Does it have the same effect? That was the intent, but.
The numbers strike me as low, and I don't know how much larger they could or should be, and a lot depends, where are they? When you're looking at clearing a lot to build a house, if it's in an R8, well, how big is the house going to be? 2,000, 2,200, 2,500 square feet. So now you've got 5,000 square feet on which to locate six
Six
trees.
trees, yeah.
That's not that hard to do. Except if the trees don't happen to be spread out that way, you got to
Right.
knock them down to build the house.
Right.
I don't know, I think it's a hard.
And my other question would be, are there any credits, which I refer to, would there be any credits against these numbers? So if preservation of a certain diameter tree, which was in the last ordinance, would that bring that down to 2 trees or 4 trees? I think that would be my only other concern.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, that I think it's just these numbers. Like, I don't think you have to have that number of trees on the property, and there's not a credit if one is extra big that.
What
Qualifying trees.
happens at the end of the process when they're seeking a certificate of appropriateness and they're found not to be in compliance?
Yeah, so that would be in HPC, which is a very specific situation and more strict rules than this would be. You'd be required to plant trees back, and they'd have to be follow this table where a evergreen tree or a tall tree, they have to be at least 6 or 8 feet high and at least 2 inches in caliper.
And realistically, if you've taken down a 40-foot tree that you were not supposed to, the fact that you put a 6 or an 8-foot tree back doesn't really replicate the canopy for 20 or 30 years.
I understand that, which is why I asked the question of.
Well, and I will say that that's specific to this. As it deals with HPC, I don't know.
Well, and the difficulty is trying to get someone to put a 30-foot tree back is,
Well, okay,
not many people sell those.
so there isn't a tree fund that they're required to contribute to.
There's that.
Go to
yeah,
that. I was
yeah.
gonna say, do you mind heading to the 8.1.2? So
Yeah, use of existing trees. for
yeah,
credit,
just taking
yeah.
a look at that real quick. So,
Sorry.
looks like some credits could apply, but I don't know if they're going to apply to that.
Yeah.
But,
gotta get
you know,
through all
I
these.
wouldn't want to give someone 2-for-1 credit when the requirement's only 4. Now, if they leave 2 trees there, they've met the requirement.
Yeah, not to try to justify it, but 5,000 or an 8,000 square foot lot is pretty small, and some of these trees are pretty big, so. Anyway, sorry, Jeremy, I wish.
No, it's okay. And I think that's just something we just keep the conversation going about and whatever our opportunities would be. And I don't know if 382 would impact this at all. Doug, what's your opinion of that?
As a possibility.
Possible. And I think further, definition of what 382
So
happens.
are we at the point where we're just going to leave the PDO as it is?
So, I mean, this council can make that decision. I think we would have to decide if it is as down zoning,
Well-
increasing the number of trees.
Understand that, but
My recommendation is, the intent was to keep it roughly the same number of trees that were being required as in the old one. I say let it run for a year and let's reevaluate. Let's see if we feel like the tree canopy is being degraded because of this.
and then we can also see if there's anything that's changed back in 382 that gives us more flexibility.
That is true.
No,
It
I-
might give us an opportunity to actually
I'm
make a
fine with
difference.
that approach, but what was the purpose of discussing this tonight?
To make you aware that this had changed between
Okay,
the previous tree buffer ordinance and what's newly in the PDO.
But Doug, I would just ask that maybe we continue, if council has blessed, maybe the discussion on it, just so I have a full understanding of it a little bit. And then whatever opportunities, if there ever is one for council, maybe we come forward with a suggestion. If again, the intent or the opinion of fellow colleagues would be to look at any changes. It may
Is there
not be.
any way to nudge the property owner, so to speak, to add more trees without having some strict code to follow? I mean, I'm just thinking about if you're shopping for a home and you have 2 homes equally they look equal, the one with more trees on the lot may be more attractive than the one that doesn't have it. And if that's the case, a developer might want to at least plant more trees. So part of me says that the marketplace should encourage builders and developers to want to have more trees to make it more attractive, especially in a village like Pinehurst where we take that seriously.
I agree with that, but I think the intent of this is when the permitting is being done to build the house, how many can you take out? Not should you put some back?
Right. Well, but if you minimize the numbers you take out,
Yeah.
you don't have to face that second question. But I mean, I agree with Jeremy. We can revisit this when we know a little bit more about any legislation. And do we get much, I'll call it complaints, from people about this topic, or Doug, or not? I don't have much.
I mean, we don't. I mean, if you're building your house and you want more trees, you just keep more trees. But we just have a responsibility to protect the tree canopy
Yes.
overall throughout the village.
One of the intents of the ordinance as well is whenever you're driving through a neighborhood or one of our streets, we can point out Murdochsville Road, we can point out there's a street in the village, striking my memory. But it's easier to build a house when you clear the trees.
Right.
Then it's more expensive to add trees back. So thus, the intent of the builder, then it's a cost that some of them just don't want to, assume. But then what can happen, certainly in an established neighborhood, is the builder comes in and clears the whole lot, builds his house, and he has great landscaping or whatever, but no trees. Then as you're driving down the street, you have changed the viewpoint of the neighborhood or the street. All of a sudden, there's no streets at certain houses because we're not requiring them to fill in and look back. And that was a lot of the intent as well, not just clear cutting it, but just making sure that we kept the feel of our neighborhoods and our streets to be consistent with everything around them. And it's, obviously it's harder, it's easier to do that with more trees requirement than less trees. So.
When you look at Hollycrest now, when you look at Walker Station that was developed, and these are not single lots, which is what we're talking about here. Walker Station, the trees have grown up.
Sure.
And it's looking like a more mature neighborhood, and Hollycrest in 10 or 15 years will probably look the same way.
Right.
They were developed under two different ordinances, so we didn't have the ordinances when Walker Station, Hollycrest, my understanding, was built to our previous PDO ordinance. So that's actually great viewpoints. And then as well as, I'm sure there'll be another one coming in the future with this one, so.
Okay.
Just a side note, Jeremy, I finally found it, so.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it looks like that we're even offering a credit if they save one tree. So those numbers that we just saw could actually lower.
You get a very large tree, yeah, you could.
So we're
And
actually
it
less
says
trees.
maybe, so that it's allowed, but it's not required. The credit may be provided.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think without prolonging this, but the title is landscape buffers. We have focused solely on trees. I know in the HPC context, they think of other things in terms of other vegetation other than trees. I don't know whether that plays into this or whether we really want to focus this just on the issue of trees.
Yeah, I mean, my original intent, and I was to focus just on the single lot development. We could talk about the development buffer ordinance if you'd like. But
Well,
maybe that could be a second.
Well,
Second.
there's going to be a follow-up to this, so maybe include it in that follow-up.
And just, since we're here, I'll just kind of go through it, but you have class 1, 2, and 3 buffers. So class A buffer, class 1 buffer is, less required because it's less dense between, more compatible uses between the two different types. And then you go up all the way to class 4 buffers, which is much more dense, so your residential uses have much more buffer between the commercial use next door.
I think one of the larger changes in my understanding, and I need to learn more of the new PDO as well, is that if you are building a development next to a development that's a pre-existing development that's just as intent or greater, you actually have less of a requirement on the buffered standards as well. And just the last one didn't, so maybe it's just something for understanding. Certainly, if we're gonna have a lot more conditional zoning application coming before us, just our understanding of that's important.
all right. Any further guidance you need from us, Doug?
No, I'm good.
Well, let's go on to item E, update on the new Given Memorial Library and other construction projects. Carlton?
It's been waiting patiently here.
Carlton said he was going to make this last till 9:30. So. He said he didn't want to go home and have to do the dishes, so we wanted to make sure they were all done.
I expect this to be brief.
Okay.
So we're going to just cover a couple of actually 3 construction projects, and we'll start with the library. And this information is from as of last week. So just the photo to the right is the library site on March 11th. And I list there the items that they've completed in the past 30 days. They completed the clear and this was as of last Thursday in a meeting, completed the clear and grub of the site, the erosion control measures. They've started parking lot fill and compaction. They've installed the construction trailer, staked out the building site. They've set up the temporary power, installed the water meter, and installed temporary fencing. And I'll see if this will work. This is some drone footage of the site. I see it moving. Next 30 days, they'll continue the parking lot fill and compaction, complete temporary power and water to the site. They'll install the plumbing and electrical sleeves for the foundation and install the irrigation tap. And they should be pouring concrete for the footers this week. They did some of the prep work on that last week, and they should be pouring concrete this week. And that's where we're at with the library as of now.
Carlton, what do we consider to be a standard construction day there? I mean, just start and stop.
Um,
The only reason I say, I happen to have driven by probably 3 times in the last 2 weeks, but it's always been at like 4:30 or something, and nobody seems to be doing it, but maybe they're
Right.
done, maybe it's 7 to 4 or whatever.
7 to 7 is the work hours, and I think it's dependent on the task
Right.
that they're completing. They're generally here about 8 o'clock, between 8 and 8:30, and I noticed them gone by 5 as well.
But that presumably can change both as daylight gets longer and as they get farther into the project.
Yes, sir.
If I understand correctly, we're anticipating a 365-day cycle to complete this project.
Yes, sir.
When is our official start date? When did the clock start running?
March the 2nd. Yep, so we're anticipating March of '27 will be substantially complete, so we should be finalizing everything and preparing to move in at that point. That may not be the actual occupancy date in 365 days, but they should be substantially complete.
Great, thank you.
And have we, or do we already have space to sort of stage the things we're going to move out of the original Gibbon Memorial Library so that it can be quickly moved into the new one, or?
So the library, probably in February or March, as we pick the actual move-in date, we'll start boxing things up and move the books. And then, as part of the bidding for the archives, we'll, I guess, make preparations for, conditioned space that's secure somewhere to move that to. So that'll be part of the
Okay.
renovation.
As we get obviously closer to some of these other decisions related to the archives, we ought to just keep in mind if we can make things as seamless as possible, so that we can pivot and they can start working over there while we're putting the finishing touches over right here.
I believe we had an allocation for technology, fits and fittings, whatever.
Yeah, FF&E, yeah.
When will we begin the process of trying to pin down exactly what we want in there?
I mean, it'll be a few months still. Have they given you a date?
Some of, they haven't. Some of that's underway now, with just like, picking, laying out where outlets will be and where, computer connections will be, network cables and TVs and things for the audiovisual features in the library. Some of that's underway now with IT, so it's not, it is part of the bid, but they don't have a timeline for it yet.
And is that something Jason and our IT people are consulting with Oakley Collier and
Yes,
their
sir.
IT people?
Yes, sir.
I think Carlton did pick out the light switch plates.
Important thing, light switch and outlets.
Yeah.
And
So,
outlets, okay.
so those are all taken care of.
Looking forward to seeing it.
I've done my
Great.
part.
So, Carlton, just for knowledge, we have or have not approved Sunday construction work on this site?
Sunday construction would have to be by request. Right now, it is
That's
not
what I'm saying.
approved.
I just wanted to make
Right.
sure, just for clarity,
Right.
at this point
Yes,
in time,
sir.
we're not until we,
And village holidays, I would have to approve for either of those.
sure, yeah, I was aware of that.
And
Do you
there's,
expect them to be working Saturdays?
we do not. Not at this point. As, you know, if weather does not cooperate or they get behind or just certain times in the project they need to work extra time, they may request that. But right now, Monday through Friday is what the plan is.
Is there an incentive for them to finish early?
No, sir. Well, there is a, liquidated damages if they go past the contract
I
date.
understand there's a-
Beyond, because of something that is beyond their control, we wouldn't assess that, but otherwise it's $500 a day.
Okay.
They don't have to work with Carlton, so that is definitely a advantage.
Okay.
Their benefit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The second one, as Council Member Fitzpatrick mentioned, is the Juniper Creek Boulevard Sidewalk Project, Phase 2. So the map on the right, the green circle indicates where we picked up at, and that's the end of the Phase 1, so Juniper Creek and Deerwood. And as of Friday, they had the form in place and prepared to pour concrete through Hampshire Lane with some of the prep work over to Kingswood Circle. So they're nearing halfway complete. I'm just realizing that we don't have people in the pictures other than those on the construction crew, and it's like, I think that had to be a significant effort to not get people in there, because every time I've ridden through there, people are on the sidewalk. It's really well received by the community, for the most part. Had a couple of hiccups and different things that we've addressed fairly quickly.
Do we have a poster cutout board of Kevin Fitzpatrick that we can put in there, some of those?
Brought to you by,
One thing, I think we need a placeholder for a ribbon cutting on this.
Yeah, of course.
This is really going to be a great success for the village.
just from an accounting standpoint, do we think we're likely to complete this by the end of the fiscal year?
We do. If the weather cooperates, contract is through July, we expect a June completion.
Great.
Maybe,
Perfect.
I'm going to stick with June. I was going to say maybe May. I think just as they move along, we may run into snags, but in June, I would expect we would be complete.
Thank you.
How many, just ballpark, how many feet a day do they manage to complete usually?
No, I don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know. And the work they do differs every day. Like some days they're forming it and some days they're pouring, so, yeah. But, I mean, they've been doing, what, 4 weeks worth of work and they did, maybe 1,000 square feet.
We're a month in and roughly halfway with the forming, so.
I think it'd be 40, 50 feet a day on an average, even though that's not how it actually gets
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last item is the Cherokee Road parking
Oh,
improvements.
yes, I saw this.
Photo bottom left is Cherokee Road. The theater building is on the right here. Gibbon Bookshop is here, and this is the area that we are talking about where it curves in front of the theater building.
I thought we talked about having one golf cart space there.
So let me scroll to the next one. So
By the
we
way-
did. I think what we're looking at this point is paving and what area will be affected. Striping and how the configuration is not really, I don't think it's finalized yet.
Yeah, 'cause we talked about that bottom hashtag area. Is that large enough for a golf cart? And
Oh,
And I think-
well, I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is if you end up with 4 spaces for cars and one has to be a golf cart, I mean, that's fine.
yeah. I think we'll measure, when it's actually built, like, okay, and
I believe that in your guys' hands, but I think, those golf cart spaces fill up. That's all I'm going to say, downtown. And, but otherwise, it looks like a good plan.
Carlton, one question. So one of the previous designs had areas that were available for planting, landscaping.
Right.
Did that go away, or was this
This,
just a
I
decision?
believe this area will be landscaping and this
Oh,
area
okay,
will
I'm just
be
reading it wrong, it's
landscaping.
not bricks, okay.
Yep.
All right, and then just for clarity for some of our concerned citizens, I mean, historically, in relation to the theater building, this hasn't been there forever. I mean, this parking circle that's been
That's
there
not
was not originally installed with a theater circle. I think we established that before, but I'm just clarifying it again.
We did, that came
I
up
remember that.
many months ago.
Sure, yeah.
Somebody was sending us
yeah.
a lot of information.
There might have been a place there once upon a time that you brought your horse-drawn carriage, but I think it was replaced by something else a long, long time ago.
Okay.
yeah. And honestly, the bushes in that little circle thing, they are old, they looking pretty scrubby.
Yeah, yeah. Good point.
Part of the plan is to make it more usable and more attractive for the area. It'll add at least 4 or 5 parking spaces. This one on the end will likely be a handicap spot, and the sidewalks will connect to the front of the theater building.
Will we be able to provide irrigation for any of the planted areas here?
Yeah, they're already irrigated. This is partially landscaped already. I mean, we're just expanding that landscaped area, and this is landscaped already too.
So you can kind of see where the current curb is in the.
What's your timeline on this one?
We're working on securing pricing. You may recall that with the Magnolia Chicopen project, we were going to do this as an alternate bid, and that never worked out.
Oh, yeah.
So we've solicited, we've talked with the person that paves for us, Turner
Turner, yeah.
Turner Asphalt, about pricing that for us. And we'll work with the contractor to get pricing and move forward with that. We have funds allocated for it already, so.
I mean, is it something that we think we'll have in place by Labor Day, or is that a little?
I think the intent is to do it over the summer.
Right.
Like,
Okay, all right, I'm just trying to get a ballpark idea. That'd
Yeah.
be great.
I mean, right now is kind of the busy season, so if we can wait till like July,
4 US kids?
Yeah.
Speaking of
Or right
Chincope-
after US Kids, probably.
Speaking of Chincope and Magnolia, we were looking at redoing a little bit of that brickwork, just because.
Yes, yeah. The contract's been signed. I don't know why he hasn't started yet. I will follow up on that.
Anything else you want to tell us about Carlton?
Everything for me unless you have questions.
I don't have any other questions. Anybody?
One question. We had talked about some streetlights for number 6. Any updates on that?
Yes, so after literally almost a year, we had a meeting this week with the contractor for Duke, and I think we're making progress. There was some confusion between Duke and their contractor. They thought it was actually done, and so they had closed it out. I was like, are you serious? But yes, it should be moving forward quickly now.
And will that involve also the, excuse me, item Martha Wicker brought up at the last?
Yep, so there are, I forget the exact number, but roughly 40 streetlights that we're adding throughout the village on, high priority intersections.
Right.
And then there are some in the historic district that are currently Cobra headlights that were changed to more decorative. I forget how many of those are. Not
Okay.
a ton of those, but.
Okay,
So,
sounds good.
So we are hoping that work begins soon.
let's just leave it at soon, but.
A good specific term.
Yeah, I would expect to see them do stuff in the next 30 days.
Oh,
What, there was some confusion, I don't know if you heard, but in Pinehurst Trace, they replaced the light posts there because they were 40 years old and the fiberglass was showing through. And so they did all that, and that was part of the request we made to them. And so they just closed out the whole thing, and so they only did half the job.
all righty. Carlton, thank you very much. Before we head to the exits, is there anything that we would like to bring to Doug's attention? And likewise, Doug, is there anything you want to bring to our attention that's likely to be on the next meeting agenda?
I have not thought 2 weeks ahead. So.
Oh, we can't, nobody believes that, Doug. Okay.
Don't we have maybe next round of the budget? First look for us at the budget?
So the budget book will be released at the next meeting, and then the hearing and more formal presentation will be at the second meeting in May.
And we may or may not have the village attorney at one of the upcoming meetings, depending on what you guys figure out.
Yeah, we'll try to do it, with just a meeting, but if we need to have everyone together, and
Sure.
we can certainly do that.
Okay,
I'll unfortunately have to miss the next meeting.
okay.
Yeah.
Other, Kevin, is there anything else that you,
Mr. Mayor, Jeremy and I have begun to poke at the Code of Ethics for the Village Council.
oh, yes.
It hasn't been updated in 16 years. And we've been looking at best practices around the state, getting consultation from the UNC School of Government. So in the next couple of weeks, not that there's any real urgency to this, but we'll be coming back to the council with some suggestions perhaps, and to get input from each of the members of the council.
That's great. And when you do that, it'd be good to see as we are and where we're headed, so we can compare what's going on. I think that's timely. Thank you for following up on that. Okay, I don't have anything else other than if I hear a motion.
I would just mention one thing that in conjunction with Jeremy, I've been working on an op-ed related to the Pinehurst traffic circle, but discovered at our meeting last night that we have a veritable fount of additional information in one of the new members of the SAC, who's regrettably out of town the rest of this week, so I may wait to get some material next week from her. We'll have to see about that. She serves on a governor's council that is related and some other stuff, so very, very interesting.
I'd like to suggest that Councilman Taylor get his own council, he get his own committees going here, and not be dipping into our talent pool.
Oh boy.
Oh, yes.
Whoa.
Lines are drawn.
Whoa.
There's a reason why we haven't updated the ethics.
Yeah.
In a long time. That's number one.
You haven't even had that
Number two.
first meeting yet, Kevin.
fact is where you find it. This person may be more skilled in the traffic than in gerontological issues.
Okay. On that note,
I move to adjourn the work session.
Second.
motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night, Alice. I've